Hey guys, my name is Basia Greki and I'm a dog behaviorist and also a certified separation anxiety trainer, and I'm here to talk with you a little bit about how to have long-term and sustainable behavior transformations that focus on your dog's well-being. So today we're going to talk about a really interesting study that's claiming that it found the cause of separation anxiety, and it's a very interesting piece of work, and we're going to look at everything that they said and pros and cons about how to read it and how to interpret all that information. So I know that you think that bringing your dog to bed with you and cuddling all the time and having them in your lap and working from home and taking them in several places with you is problematic, but that is not true. There is nothing wrong with doing all those things that I told you and spoiling your dog and giving your dog the best food ever and giving them loads of treats and training with them, giving them lots of love. That is not the reason why dogs have separation anxiety. But the problem is that when you do those things, sometimes you might not be doing other things. So when you are sleeping with your dog in bed, have you trained your dog as well to be by themselves? When you are working from home, have you ever gradually introduced them to being by themselves in the house? When you have them in your lap all the time, is that because your dog cannot be on the floor, doesn't have any kind of independence, or is because you just enjoy the cuddles? So you're creating those moments where you would train as well as having the moments where you would be very close to each other is really important. So the sleeping in bed is not the cause for separation, but it might have some correlation, because might be that you never trained your dog to do anything else because you're so comfortable with your dog in bed. Basically is that. And the problem is that the whole industry gets a study like this one that came out, and it says really interesting things. It says, for example, that people that are 16 years old all the way to 35, they have more, it's more likely for the dog to have separation anxiety than a person that's is older than 35 years old. Then those dogs are less likely to have separation anxiety. And this is, I think, is the most important point for me to use an example, because it's not about how old is the person, most likely, right? It's about what are the habits this person has when they are 16. Are they going to be able to train the dog? Are they going to be consistent with certain things? Are they going to have to leave them in that house without having a preparation, without having maybe a network that could help them, dog sitters, pet sitters, and dog walkers, and people around them that could support them? Did they do very gradual training? Were they educated about what is good and what is not so good for our dogs? Or how do we meet their needs? There are so many questions about that. Are they more likely to be outside the house and leave the dogs for long periods of times by themselves? There's many things there. So when a study says that they found correlation between those two things, they don't mean that people that are 16 years old are more likely to have dogs that have separation anxiety. What they're saying is that they are lumping loads of habits with certain ages that most likely are causing or are correlated to separation. But the problem is that this study stopped there. It was a very much of an overview, and it was very complicated because it touched on certain subjects that were read they were twisted basically by many articles. So one of the things that they mentioned in this study was that dogs that were trained with treats and food were more likely to have separation anxiety. But what else could be causing that is not exactly related to treats? Could it be that those dogs don't actually have separation anxiety, but they have frustration when the person leaves the house because they are expecting to be close to the person because the person means food? So it's a very, as you can see, it's a very complicated subject. But what I wanted you to understand is that when the studies are done, they are done using specific methods. Some of the studies are going to be done using controlled trials that have randomized, so it's going to be a randomized trial that have a huge amount of dogs that are being studied. They are followed for a certain period of time. They have a controlled environment where all the habits are very similar, so there is not much else being introduced in dog's life, for example. There is loads of little details that we need to pay attention. In this type of study, this is a not such a robust study. Basically, they are gathering information from a person who is not a professional, who is looking at a certain situation and evaluating with the information that they have, which might not be wrong, but it might not be the most accurate information for a study, for example. And they are evaluating certain points, and this is being reviewed by a person that never saw that dog, never assessed that dog. And this leads us to sometimes a lot of confusion, a lot of conclusions being drawn from something that they shouldn't, because this study was not about causation, it was about correlation. And in my opinion, this was not a very impactful and very interesting study. It didn't bring anything that was super different or that we didn't know about, but it did cause quite a lot of polemic and it did cause quite a lot of confusion. And this is why I brought this here, because most likely we're going to be talking about this for a long period of time, and we're going to have to be bursting those myths for a long period of time. So basically in this study it says that dogs that ate treats, they were more likely to have separation, which doesn't mean causation. The treats are not causing separation in your dog. There is no correlation to that. And another thing that we saw in this study is that dogs that were first after coming back into the house were more likely to have separation anxiety, and we have a few studies debunking this already. Very robust, very interesting studies that were debunking this information. So there is no point in us going back and discussing this again. And another point that they brought that I thought was confusing for most people is about the sleeping in bed or not sleeping in a crate. And I feel like this one can be quite harmful because I see loads of puppies with separation anxiety or separation related problems because crate training is being trained wrong. And people were chucking their dogs inside the crate, closing the door, and leaving them to cry out. And this we can say that there is a correlation of causation rather than the correlation between those 2 points. So I feel like basically the study made more harm than good in my opinion, because it really didn't come across as something positive. And I'm sure this was not the intention. I'm sure the developers were really interested on understanding a little bit more a few things. They brought up something interesting, which is related to the amount of hours per sleep in the evening. So dogs that slept 9 hours per night, they were less likely to have separation, and dogs that slept between 6 and 8 had more probability to have separation at 6 months old. I thought this was quite interesting. Is not causation. We just know that there is a correlation there. What kind of correlation it is, it would have to be investigated. And the study says that as well. most of the points that were raised were just correlation. We need to investigate more to understand them. But apart from that, I just feel like we need to be really cautious. And something that concerns me a bit is that the industry keeps using those informations and twisting them to create conversations. And those conversations, they are not being useful for you, in my opinion. Most of those articles are saying half truths, and they are not explaining where the study comes from. And most people will understand this wrong. So it's time for us to stop using our dog's welfare to twist and use in ways that are going to benefit marketing and things like that, because there is much more to it than just making an article important to view or having loads of likes, or a post on Instagram having loads of comments. And we know that this happens across the board. It's not only in dog training, but in dog training, it's a very close to heart subject for me. So it annoys me when this happens. And so let's clear the room for a second and let's just talk about what will work in separation. So rather than thinking, oh my God, things will cause my dog separation, this study also noticed that punishment, so you're shouting at your dog, telling them off, using physical punishment, so like for example putting that face on pee and things like that, can be correlated to separation anxiety at around 6 months. So there is a few things that are very similar to other studies that we saw that are more robust. So those are the things that you should focus on. So you're not punishing, using very kind and clear communication and training, using positive reinforcement, using food, yes, using food, and focusing on teaching your dog how to be alone, not restricting the amount of time you spend with your dog, but just finding moments in the day, even for short periods of time, that you could be separated, and gradually, but very, very, very gradually increase that. Because what you need and what's going to work is to habituate this dog to be alone and not to force, because if you force, you're not going to create positive associations with that. And what we need is positive associations with being calm when you're not inside of the house. This is what really going to work for you. And you need to do that and stop focusing on every single article says to you to do or to not do in separation. So this works because it doesn't push our dogs to do things that they're not capable of. It works in that pace and respect what they are feeling. So this helps them to learn bit by bit and get better and better to do long times alone. So long periods of time, like 1 or 2 hours for puppies, what is recommended. Beside that, I feel like we just need to decrease the amount of information we consume and always consume from very good professionals that are making responsible content that is not for exploding and becoming viral, but is for educating and making our dog's life better, basically. So if this was helpful for you, I would love if you could follow this podcast and give us a review. And if you'd like to get in contact, I would love to chat with you on Instagram. So we are at Positive Dog London on Instagram, and also this is our email, so it'll be positivedoglondon@gmail.com. So if you need anything, reach out. And if you would like some help to get on track with your separation anxiety training, even if you already made any of those, follow any of those ideas of crying out or certain interactions, give us a shout and we can definitely help you with the situation and get you back on track in your training, help you to have better results, more effective results without all this pressure, all this information suffocating you and making you think, I don't really know what is true and what's not true anymore. So if you need any help, get a discovery call in the website and we can chat about this. I hope this was fun and I speak to you soon. Bye.